Floating point numbers. Floating point numbers are much simpler. Basically, the only choice we have is the precision that we want to choose. We can also set a range of values, as you see on the screen. It's a large decimal number. It's stored as float and requires only 8 bytes to store in the database. It supports from 0 to 5 decimal places, and a maximum and minimum range can be set. Floating point attributes perform slightly faster calculations and require half the space in the database that a decimal number would. However, they may lose a little bit of accuracy in the least significant digit if there is a decimal. Now, if you perform all of your calculations on floating point numbers, then the results will always be the same. You may run into some issues when you're doing calculations that total up between floating point numbers and decimal numbers, in which case you need to be careful. Generally, it's recommended that you try and use consistent numbering. So either if you feel like it's important to have absolute balanced calculations every single time, then make sure that you're using either decimal or all floating point. So here's the update form for a sample float attribute that I created earlier in the account entity. As usual, we can change the display name, the requirement level, whether it's searchable. Because it's a custom field, I can alter field security. Auditing is supported, is currently enabled, and can be disabled. And we can change the description. The other things that we can change are the precision, or the number of decimal points. I can change the minimum value, the maximum value, and also IME mode. Now note, when I change the precision, it does not change what is actually stored in the database, only the way that it's represented. That way you're not actually going to truncate data when you make this kind of change. Decimal numbers, as we mentioned earlier, also allow us to store decimal numbers. In this particular case, we can go to 10 digits of precision, and the minimum and maximum values are stated here. So basically, it's a large decimal number with more decimal places. It does require 13 bytes in the database and is stored as type decimal. Supports from 0 to 10 decimal places, and range. It's slightly slower in calculations, although probably not that big a deal. And it does require a little bit more space in the database. However, it will always calculate correctly to the last digit of precision. So here's the update form for a sample decimal field that's been created as a custom field. We can update the display name, the requirement level, whether or not it's searchable, the field security and auditing options, and the description. In this case, we can also alter the precision. We can change the minimum value, and for that matter, the maximum value. Use the currency field for anything whatsoever that's related to monetary transactions. This is because CRM has multi-currency support, and there's special things that get created along with the currency field that you designate. It's stored as decimal and requires 8 bytes in the database. However, there's more to this. We'll get to that in a moment. It supports from 0 to 4 decimal places, or it can be set up to match either the configuration of your CRM organization for pricing decimal precision or currency precision. There's a maximum range that supports both negative and positive numbers to a fairly large size. When we create a custom field for currency in CRM, there's actually 3 fields that get created. The transaction currency, which is the field that you're entering in, the base currency, and the exchange rate. In effect, the transaction currency will always be the currency in which the transaction takes place, and the base currency will be the currency in which the organization keeps its books. The base currency, as well as transaction currencies, are configured at the time of CRM installation and maintenance. That's outside the scope of this particular segment, but in effect, this gives you the ability to be able to handle what you need in multi-currency situations. Before we go and take a look at the update form for a currency attribute, I wanted to point out the fact that we have more than one entity that gets created when we create an entity of type currency. So here is an out-of-the-box attribute called market cap, and down here is market cap base. So market cap is going to be the transaction currency, and market cap base will be the translated base currency, or the currency that the organization keeps its books in. Okay, so let's take a look at the form. On the currency form, we can still change the display name, the requirement level, whether or not it's searchable. Since this is an out-of-box field, again, field security is not enableable, but field auditing is, and the description can be changed. With currency, we can now go and change the precision, as well as to pick the minimum and maximum values, or to turn on or off IME mode. Multiple lines of text. This is primarily for storing large amounts of text, well beyond 4,000 character maximum that other fields would support. It's stored as anvarchar, parentheses max, close parentheses, and it's stored in Unicode, which means it requires 2 times the number of characters in the string length in the database. i.e., if I have a text section that contains 1,000 characters of text, it would require 2,000 bytes in the database. The maximum size is approximately 100,000 characters, so as you can see, it's much larger than anything that we've had previously. And it's not stored in the normal way in SQL 2008, so this allows us to get around the record size limits. So here's the update form for the multiple lines of text type of attribute. We can change the display name, the requirement level, whether it's searchable, auditing, description, and we can also change the maximum length. So in this particular case, I'm going to go ahead and change this to 9,000 characters, which would overload the record if it was being stored in any other type of field, but because of the type of field that this is, then saving this in this mode will allow us to go well beyond the 8K max that can be stored in a particular entity record. The date and time attribute type stores the date and time. It requires 8 bytes in the database. The option for date only stores the date and time but only displays the date. So that means you can switch between date only and date time formats, and there's no data loss because the time is always stored in the database. It just determines which controls are displayed on the form based upon the selection that you make. On the date and time update form, you can change the display name, the requirement level, whether or not it's searchable, the normal constraints apply to field security, auditing is enabled, you can change the description, but basically from the format you can change between date only and date time. While this will not affect the data, it will affect which controls are seen on the screen, whether you'll just see the calendar control or if you'll see the calendar and the time control represented for this particular attribute on the screen. The lookup field is actually a way of creating a new relationship between 2 entities. It really is just a pointer or foreign key GUID to an entity record. It's stored in the database as unique identifier and requires 16 bytes in the database. It actually creates a many-to-one relationship where the entity containing the new attribute is the many and the target record type that you select is the one. After an attribute is created, a link to the relationship is displayed, which allows you to update the entire relationship from this link. It's a very fast way to be able to create a new relationship on the fly. This is the update panel for a lookup field. While we can change the display name, the requirement level, and whether or not it's searchable, and whether it can be audited, there's very little else that we can change unless we go to the link to edit the relationship directly. So let's do that now. So here's the components of an out-of-box relationship. And many of the things that cannot be modified here can be modified on custom relationships that are created. So in this particular case, we can see that we can still change the display name, the requirement level, and the description. On custom entities, we're also able to change the components in the navigation pane item for primary entity and relationship behavior, but that's not the case with out-of-box entities.